Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for Storage Done Differently, a fresh approach to protecting your data and saving you time and money. We have Drobo here with us today to present. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. This session is going to be recorded and it will be available on www.macmall.com following the webinar. Also, if you have any questions either during or after the presentation, feel free to type them into the chat panel or the Q&A panel. If at any time your Q&A panel or chat panel disappear, please just hover over the top center of your screen and there you will see your WebEx dashboard. You can go ahead and select your chat panel, and if you scroll all the way to the right, there's an arrow, and if you click that, you will find your Q&A panel as well. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker. Our speaker today is Mario Blandini with Drobo. He is the Vice President of Technology Solutions, and he has spent more than 2 decades working in IT as a user and technical expert in IT companies, starting his career with mainframes and distributed systems in the United States Marine Corps. He has developed IT solutions at Toshiba, EDS, ADP, and Sunrise, and developed solutions at Rhapsody Networks, Brocade, and Drobo. Mario is a top-rated speaker at industry conferences, events, and customer meetings worldwide. Past events include Storage Networking World USA, DS Expo, Japan's largest storage expo, various conferences on storage and data center by IDC and Gartner, IBM Storage Symposium, IBM Z-Series Conference, Veritas Vision, HP World, and Brocade events on all 6 inhabited continents and more. Mario is responsible for technical marketing, the pre-sales technical team, product marketing contribution, and solution development with industry partners. He is the voice of Drobo webcasts and podcasts and the pitchman in most Drobo videos. Talk live to Mario and other Drobo experts at www.drobo.com/live, or feel free to email Mario at mario@drobo.com. So now, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Mario. Mario, it's all yours.
Hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. And quite a long introduction. If it makes me sound old, hopefully the stuff we talk about today will actually sound quite new and refreshing. Today's agenda, we have to admit it, we're investing 60 minutes in this particular session, and hopefully it's because we're going to discuss approaches to storage. They're going to help you for the most type of projects that you're participating in these days. And I don't know about you guys, but myself, the thing that's most scarce in my life, sure, people might say money is most scarce, but generally speaking, it's time. Time to work more and potentially earn more, time to work harder on saving more, or time just to do just about anything. Today's society is quite challenging when it comes to that, especially when talking to folks about the way it used to be. So embracing the fact that technology and innovation is what it is, we're going to talk about ways that you can do all the things that you need to do, but also save some time in the process. And in the spirit of saving time, we'll make sure that we have time for live Q&A. I see that folks are already using the Q&A panel and potentially even the chat, so feel free to ask some questions live on the fly and we can make sure we answer those for you. Because we're investing some time, I want to make sure that you are getting the most out of this. From a background perspective, I was introduced pretty well, so there's some information there, and as I would suggest, if you want to email me, non-filtered, my email address is as shown there, mario@drobo.com, and we host live demonstrations. I'm going to give you a little flavor of that during today's session, but we go deep into demonstrations live with the technology multiple times a day at drobo.com/live if you want to check that out. Now, who is Drobo? We make award-winning data storage products. And for a lot of folks, the Mac itself, Mac technology, and the applications that you are using tend to be the most exciting things. And things like storage, albeit really important and necessary in the overall solution, really aren't as interesting. And one of the reasons why Drobo's won so many awards is that we've done a combination of sophistication that you'd expect from enterprise-type products that are built for IT people, with management features and stuff that's so easy to use that a creative professional, someone who doesn't really understand technology computers very well but uses them to create rich media and other assets, they're great at using Drobo's through that combination. It's the specific technology that Drobo has developed called BeyondRAID, which I'll describe in this session today, that gives us the ability to give you, in a relatively small box, a experience and a set of storage that really is something you'd get only with other larger scale storage systems that are either very, very complicated or and/or very, very expensive. So we can give you a great experience, and for hundreds of thousands of customers, in fact over 200,000 customers and counting, they're experiencing the Drobo for things like backup and archiving their rich media, virtualizing servers, and all sorts of IT application needs. So we'll talk about that in today's sessions, and as I mentioned before, definitely feel free to ask some questions in the chat or in the Q&A window. So during my introduction, I was definitely shown as being an older person, so I was definitely around back in 1984. I'm not sure how many of you listening remember those days real clearly, but as Mac enthusiasts, I'd imagine that you remember the television commercial that aired during the Super Bowl back in 1984, an image of that in the lower left-hand corner of the slide that shows a hammer thrower throwing a hammer through a screen in an auditorium filled with drones that were following what was historical computing, the way of IBM, the normal sort of stuff. And while it doesn't look too snappy then, the first Mac really was revolutionary in 1984. Now, it wasn't inexpensive. It cost quite a bit of money for the average person, so not everybody bought one for their house. And from a complexity standpoint, most people who used them were still computer people. But if you think about the 27, 28 years since that time, we've had tremendous innovation in the way computing is done. So much so that it's available in a form like an iPad, which is affordable to most everybody. Now, granted, not everybody can afford one, but if you think about it as a computing platform, it's very, very affordable to the average person these days. And it's so simple that an infant already knows how to use an iPad and play games and do things on an iPad. Incredible innovations with regard to ease of use as well as affordability, the whole concept of consumerization of technology. The same thing happened in printing. You may not be aware, the first HP LaserJet printers were introduced also back in 1984. They were over $10,000 and you needed a full-time staffer to vacuum it out every couple of pages and install new fonts via PROM chips that physically went into the system. Certainly not easy to use and also not very affordable. But these days, most grandparents have a printer at their house that costs them less than $100 that they can print photos of their grandkids on. Easy and affordable. Now, if you're not familiar with a whole lot of storage technology, we're going to provide a lot of background on that today. Back in 1984, some folks at the University of California at Berkeley figured out a way to make individual hard drives look like they were a collection of them would look like one big one and provide a very important benefit to the user. Specifically, if a hard drive failed, you would not lose access to the data. And this technology is known as RAID, or Redundant Array of Independent Disks, or inexpensive devices it was originally called, but inexpensive in the context of an enterprise customer using mainframe computers. These days, RAID is just about everywhere, and from an IT person's perspective, most folks know exactly how to use it, albeit they don't really love it. It takes a lot of time, and it's not something that they're necessarily fond of. But certainly providing protection from a hard drive failure is an important thing. And if you think about the innovation that happened in computing, also the innovations that happened in printing, you haven't seen a lot of the same from a storage perspective. And that's basically who Drobo is. Our company was started in 2005, and our first products came in 2007 with the sole purpose of making the technology both more affordable by giving you freedom to procure your own hard drives, but also make it super easy to use so anybody could use it. And if you're a technical person and you already know how to use RAID, what it means to you is it's going to save you a whole lot of time so that you can invest those time savings in other things that you have going on. Because for most folks, storage is important, but they don't want to spend all their time managing it. So that's kind of some background there for those who weren't don't remember 1984? Heck, YouTube's great because you can go back and look at all those old commercials. I encourage you, if you've never seen it, go look at that introduction of the Mac commercial that happened back in 1984. All right. Speaking to this audience at Mac Mall, odds are you resemble this very same thing. Who would ever have thought that a small office or a home office would have more data that could fit on an individual hard drive? And, well, go figure, hard drives are even getting bigger. There are 4 terabyte desktop grade hard drives available today. Who would have thought they'd ever really get that big? And how big will they get? Well, they'll just continue to grow in size as history has shown. What we do know, though, is the average small business also has more storage that can fit on a single hard drive. In fact, it's starting to get to be so much with things like smartphones and HD video and disk-based backup and other applications that are just really taking up a lot of space, forcing you to think more about storage regardless of what type of environment you have, because you want to make sure that it's protected, and keeping it all in one place is important, because for a lot of folks, hey, the real storage problem isn't that they have a lack of protection, it's the fact that it's so spread out and it's not centralized that it's almost impossible to protect. So the concept of adopting a storage solution that can allow you to put everything together in a cost-effective way will make it inherently easier to manage, and you want to make sure that that platform that you're doing your storage on will scale, will work with all the applications that are important in your environment, and allow you to save some money along the way, because this idea of having lots of hard drives laying around is propagated by the idea that overall individual hard drives have been relatively inexpensive, so it's kind of promoted this whole sprawl of lots of storage laying around all over the place. Getting it centralized is a big help in making sure it's protected. And if we look then at what Drobo can do, this is a high-level overview of the types of things that Drobo does with BeyondRAID technology. We use the term BeyondRAID because it's more than just what you would expect from the stuff built back in 1984. We put together a set of technologies that are easy enough to operate by following simple traffic signals. Green, yellow, red lights is all you need to know in order to operate a Drobo. So that's going to save you a bunch of time. Even if you are a highly technical IT person, you can still benefit greatly from not having to worry about as much stuff and not having to spend the time it takes to go ahead and do things. I'll show you an example of mixing and matching drives, which is a very big benefit specific to saving on cost. Traditional RAID systems, if you were to buy them from most vendors, would require you to buy only hard drives that are qualified and available through that storage vendor. That often results in a 3 to 4, even 5x cost premium per hard drive, and one of the things that keeps folks from scaling out, because the cost of the storage can be very expensive when bought that way. If you're building your own sort of solution and you were using traditional RAID, you'd be limited to having what's called a lowest common denominator of storage, which I'll show you here in an example in a couple of slides. In any case, Drobo has broken through that barrier by allowing you to mix and match any drives at any time. And the past year has been an interesting one in history. Almost always, I can say always except for the last year, almost always you can expect to see a 40% decline every year in the cost of storage on a per capacity basis. So example, if you were to have a 1 terabyte hard drive at point X on the timeline, and it was 100 US dollars, you could expect that to be 60 US dollars 1 year later. And the reason that happens is the 2 terabyte drives that came out in conjunction with that are also declining in price, which is driving down the price per capacity. The 2 terabyte drive would then be more dense, give you more total capacity, but would not be doubling in price every time it comes out. So that's one of the things that you can benefit from if you're allowed to mix and match different drives, because you can start with smaller ones, add larger ones in the future, and take advantage of the price economics there. Now, because Drobo does all of the RAID stuff for you, and RAID, as I mentioned before, redundant array of independent disks, taking what looks like in total many hard drives, but giving you visibility to one or more volumes that would be comprised of that capacity. Drobo does all of that stuff for you, so you don't need to understand what RAID level 1 versus RAID level 5 versus RAID level 10 versus all the different RAID levels that exist. That saves you a whole lot of time because you can be up and running in 5 minutes by putting any types of hard drives into a Drobo, whereas with a different type of storage system, you have to plan out a installation process that would take you through getting it all set up. So it saves you time and saves you a lot of money because you don't need to worry about those levels. Now, I'll break into a live demo here toward the end and show you how easy it is to expand a Drobo. Pop in a drive when you see a yellow light, which it might be a little small on your screen for you to see, but yellow light means add a drive here soon. As you get to filling up the system, we'll give you an indication you should add more storage. No other action is required other than taking a standard 3.5-inch drive, the same type of 3.5-inch SATA drive that you might have inside of a computer, certainly the ones that are most common that you'll find at any store or buying it from Mac Mall. You can buy those, pop it in, and all of the expansion is done for you automatically. This is another really big time saver for folks who are busy. They would rather focus their time elsewhere, or they may not have a lot of the expertise to go ahead and put together a protected storage solution. That automatic and instant expansion of capacity is a really big time saver for folks. Now, there's a concept of thin provisioning. I'll describe that in a slide a little bit later, but in essence, it allows you to see objects in your mirror that appear to be very, very large, but in actuality can be really quite small. So you don't have to buy all the storage up front in order to deploy lots of storage. For folks who understand how storage has traditionally operated over the past 25 years, you have to, if you wanted to have 2 terabytes for a single system, you had to buy 2 terabytes just for that system and put it in there. In this case, you can have shared storage in the middle that will allow you to make it look like you have 10 terabytes, 20 terabytes, as much storage as you want, but you only have to buy what you need up front so that you never have to go back and change the way your application or your computer looks at that storage over the network or directly connected to it. So that concept of thin provisioning really makes it easy to both save money and save time, and combined with all the other things that BeyondRAID does, makes for that really simple experience that gives you those time savings. And last, there's a feature of our 1200i product. I'm hoping that that's one of the reasons why you want to join this webcast, because there are a lot of folks that are looking for a combination of performance and capacity. And typically, you'd have to choose between one or the other. And with this new technology from Drobo, we automatically expand a storage pool when you add SSDs. But if you add enough of them, 3 or just 3 in a dual disk redundancy configuration, I'll just describe more of what that means later, add some SSDs and automatically all of your transactional data goes faster. That definitely increases performance, and if you think of alternatives on achieving the very same solution, a lot of time and a lot of money is saved. So those are the things that Drobo does. It is a fresh approach on how you can do storage for your environment. Let's talk a little bit more about how it might specifically work in your particular projects. I'll restate some of the basics. If you want to add capacity to Drobo, simply add a drive. You don't need to know what RAID level you're currently using or what RAID level you want to use after you add it. So we put it in there. We will rebuild everything automatically. If you wanted to do that sort of thing and change your RAID levels, you'd have to do a lot of complicated things to the storage device. Drobo knows that those make it impractical to ever do it, and what most hosts would do, they would need to add new volumes or buy entirely new storage devices to go ahead and expand. With Drobo, it's as simple as adding a hard drive or taking a smaller drive out and replacing it with a larger one. That's that third bullet down. You can expand a Drobo by taking a small drive that you may have bought in the past, replace it with a larger drive, and automatically Drobo will expand everything and relay out everything without you having to make any decisions whatsoever. It's a pretty cool feature that allows you to then ride that cost curve of drives over time and treat the hard drives as something that would have a shorter useful life, but the Drobo itself, the central location where you have all your storage, would be something you could hold on to long term and really invest in putting all your stuff in a central place. It's both protected and will make it easier for you to use all in one spot. Now, the whole concept of mixing and matching drives, I'll give you an example here, and paying as you grow is a factor of those mixing and matching drives. The types of drives you'd use, any 3.5-inch SATA drive, SATA 1, SATA 2, SATA 3, any type of SATA drive works great from any manufacturer. This is unlike most RAID systems where you'd have to procure the storage from the vendor you bought the RAID enclosure from, and they give you a limited selection on the types of hard drives that you could use. Any drive works, and this is one of the biggest things that helps simplify things and drives down the economics of owning a shared storage system. It's because of this support. I talked about replacing a smaller one with a larger one if you ever needed to. Drobos are simple enough that you look at the front panel, the lights tell you everything you need to know. I'll show you a little bit more information about our Drobo dashboard software that allows you to do a couple of other things, but for the most part, once you get a Drobo set up and it's the storage is out there, you're never going to use the graphic user interface, the GUI, to do any management. It's as simple as looking at the lights on the front panel. One of those lights includes some capacity gauges. I'll show you that here in a second. And if you're wondering how Drobo does it from a storage protection perspective, if you lose a hard drive with traditional RAID, you would have the system rebuild itself if you elect what's called a hot spare, or an additional hard drive that is sitting in reserve waiting to kick in the event of a hard drive failure. Drobo doesn't have a hot spare, so there's no penalty. You don't lose storage by having a hot spare. The free space in your system is the hot spare, so we'll automatically rebuild in the event of a hard drive failure as long as you have enough free space to do the rebuild. So the benefit here is it doesn't necessarily save you additional storage in the long run compared to a hot spare when you have a failure incident like that. What it does do is it means that that drive is always a part of the storage pool. It's being used actively as a part of the storage pool, and we're scrubbing it for errors and making sure that it's up and healthy all the time. So you have access to it and you're using it versus it sitting there idle. And it is something that we do automatically, so there's no need to manage that. As long as there's enough free space, you follow the lights on the front panel, we take care of everything. And I did mention there that we do scrub for errors in the background. One of the things that people are worried about quite often with storage, especially if they take a hard drive and they put it on a shelf, if they pull it back off a shelf and go to power it up, what's going to happen? Are they going to 100% for sure be able to get access to that data? And one of the reasons why people are going to online archives with systems like a Drobo is that you can centralize that archive, have it online in an enclosure like a Drobo, and we're constantly scrubbing it in the background for errors, and it's also more readily accessible. You can get access to that archive very quickly with a Drobo because it's mounted up, it's ready to go, and you can have the hard drive spun down, so it's saving a whole lot of electricity while being ready to go in the event that you do need to call up that information. So let's talk about thin provisioning real quick just to make sure folks understand what that is. The way RAID works, it's a form of virtualization where you have hard drives in the back, and you can create from groups of hard drives a RAID group, and from a RAID group have certain volumes associated with those RAID groups. The way other RAID systems work, many don't have thin provisioning at all. So you have what you provision is what you get. When they do have thin provisioning, they often make you pull from a very specific set of drives from a RAID group. So you have this ability to get imbalanced very quickly and not have a uniform allocation of the way the storage works. So it's a little bit better than having no thin provisioning, but it's not the ideal solution across the board. And the way Drobo does it with a common drive pool, all the drives you put into Drobo automatically work that way. We only use the blocks that are actually being used by the volumes, so you can have much larger volumes presented, and will actually consume just what's been written to the drives. So you can pay as you grow over time, and you don't have these imbalances that you can get with using traditional RAID technology. Another really great thing about it is that we have thin reclamation. So as you delete data from any of your volumes, that free space goes automatically back into the common storage pool to make it available for other volumes that you have out there. So it's always thin, stays thin with no scripts to run. It's the type of stuff that IT folks really want to look for, but it's available to everybody because Drobo does it automatically. Now let's talk about that example of mixing and matching drives. If I had a mixture of drives here, you'd see that they are of varying sizes. If I were traditional RAID, I would only get to use the equivalent of the smallest drive's capacity across all of the drives. Even though there's a lot more capacity physically on the drive, the way RAID works is this lowest common denominator. You only get to use the size of the smallest drive, and with RAID protection, in this case RAID 5, which is striping with parity, that parity information would use the equivalent of one hard drive's capacity. So 75% would be usable, 25% would not be, but the biggest penalty you have with mixing the drive sizes with traditional RAID is all of the big drives get made to look like small drives. Not really beneficial in terms of you doing an expansion. Now with BeyondRAID, we give you a combination of striping with parity and mirroring 100% automatically. There's nothing you can do to even configure this. We'll just do it automatically because we want it to be as easy to use as possible for you, and we know how to make sure that the data is always protected while giving you maximum capacity. And one of the ways we make sure it's protected, if you see here on the 2 terabyte drive, there is some space that would be reserved for future expansion. We will only allow you to use space that can be written redundantly. So in the case of the 750 gig drive, there's going to be a section of the 750 gig drive to include a section of the 2 terabyte drive, which will have mirrored data sets, so written on both drives simultaneously, so that in the event of any drive failing, you still get access to that data. A combination of RAID levels all together, giving you the maximum of what you would need, and as you grow, you can take that 250 gig drive out, put a new 2 terabyte drive in, and radically expand the storage system by taking advantage of all the space on that 2 terabyte drive, all without having to touch anything in the graphic user interface. Just follow the lights on the front panel. Super easy. Now, there is one setting that Drobo allows you to choose, and that's the concept of dual disk redundancy. Now, we don't want this to sound complicated because it is something that's all automatic. On our B1200i, it's enabled by default. On all other products, it's disabled by default. It's available on our 5-bay and larger systems, so not available on the 4-bay. It protects against a second hard drive failure. So folks who understand what RAID 6 is, the concept of striping with double parity, it would mean that you could lose 2 drives simultaneously and you still have access to your data. And while that may not sound like a common scenario to you, losing 2 drives at the same time, it does protect you. And for the cost of 1 additional hard drive, maybe even $100, you can get insurance against the following scenario. Let's say that you have a system, it's up and running, everything's on it, it's working great. For an unexpected reason, a hard drive fails. And hard drives fail. They're mechanical. They are rated to operate for a long service life, but if they do fail, that's why you have RAID protection, to automatically rebuild and protect you from that scenario. Now, during the rebuild, it can take some time. Drobo offers proportional rebuild, so we only rebuild the data that's actually there, so oftentimes it's faster than it would be on a traditional RAID system. But if you have a lot of data there, let's say you have a 2 terabyte drive fail, there's 2 terabytes worth of data potentially that needs to be redistributed back across all of the other disks. So that could take some time. If during that time you're continuing to use the system quite aggressively, and the system's also rebuilding, it's a time of extra activity for the system, so high stress, so to speak. If another hard drive were to fail during that rebuild process, you would have a data loss without a feature like dual disk redundancy or RAID 6. So it's really up to you to decide whether or not you want that extra protection. For a lot of people, if they're backing up to a Drobo, it's storing backup images. Hey, single disk redundancy or the equivalent of RAID 5 is perfect because they have protection from a hard drive failure, and it's not the only copy that they have there. It's the backup copy.